Good evening, friends. I'm here to do a presentation on the place of Deuteronomy in the Bible in submission on the course Deuteronomy and Biblical Ethics, OTS 5121, under the lectureship of Mr. Isaac Conaway. The book of Deuteronomy is a call for faithfulness. It's the fifth book on the Bible, the final book of the Torah. It constitutes a bridge between the Pentateuch and the rest of the Old Testament book from Joshua to 2 Kings. After Exodus, Israel were in the wilderness for 1 year, entering into a covenant with their God. They had a disastrous road trip through the wilderness. The Exodus generation disqualified themselves from entering the promised land. Those of 20 years and above at the time of Exodus all died. So, Deuteronomy starts with Moses standing in front of this new generation, explaining the Torah in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 1 to 5. This is where the purpose of the book unfolds. Deuteronomy is a series of speeches from Moses calling the next generation of Israel to be faithful with their God. At the center of the book is a collection of laws, chapters 12 to 26. These are the terms of the covenant between God and Israel. Some laws are new, but some are repeated from the laws given earlier at Mount Sinai. Hence its name, Deuteronomy, a Greek word meaning the second law. Surrounding these laws are two of Moses' speeches, each of which are broken down into two parts themselves. In chapters 1 to 3, Moses summarizes the story so far and highlights how rebellious the previous generation was. In contrast to the grace and provision. And although God brought justice on them, he did not abandon his covenant promises. In chapters 4 to 11, it's a series of passionate sermons. Moses calls on this generation to be more faithful than their parents to the covenant. He reminds them of the 10 Commandments. Hence, the center of this section is called the Shema, which means to listen. Listen, the Lord is your God. The Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. As in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 to 5. This, friends, became a number one daily prayer for Judaism. The word Shema in Hebrew means more than just to hear. It involves the response, which ultimately leads to obey. Similarly, the word love means more than just emotions. It involves decision, which ultimately leads to devotion. For Israel, their obedience and devotion to God is going to make them a unique people among the nations. Just like the Lord said, they will become a kingdom of priests in Exodus chapter 19. Now, Moses says, now Israel has a chance by following the laws to show the whole world the wisdom and the justice of God. The other key idea in the Shema is that Israel is called to obey and be devoted to the Lord alone. The Lord is one. The one God that Israel is to worship. Israel are about to enter the land of Canaan, where people worship idol gods, representing all aspects of creation, the sun, the moon, the earth, the weather, the sex, wars, etc. Moses' view of worshiping these gods degrades humanity and communities. but worshiping God of Israel, who is the creator and redeemer, will lead to life and blessings. Let's now go to the large collections of the laws in the center, represented by chapter 12 to 26. These are roughly arranged per topic. In chapters 12 to 16a, we have the opening section of the law about worshiping God. They were to have one central place where one God will be worshipped in Israel's care for the poor. For example, they were to set aside a tenth of their annual income to care for the Levites, and a tenth every 3 years to care for the poor. These laws would distinctively separate them from their neighbors. That is all about the worship of God. Moving on to the next section, in chapters 16b to 18, this deals with the character and qualities of Israel's leaders, the elders, the priests, and the kings. They were placed under the authority of the covenant laws, which God had said He would keep the leaders accountable. In contrast, Israel's neighbors were kings without all those divine laws and a law to themselves. For example, the Ayedi of Ur-Namur, the Middle Assyrian laws, and the Code of Hammurabi. Israel's leaders were subordinate to the law and the prophets. Immediately under this section follows Israel's laws of marriage, family, and business, and social justice. That will be found in chapters 19 to 26. Their legal systems and how it was supposed to protect the widows, orphans, and foreigners. Now, let me share the tips of reading these laws. We ought to recognize that these are Israel's higher level of justice, the terms of Sinai's covenant to ancient Israel. Thus, it shouldn't be compared with our modern laws. Rather, be compared with Israel's neighbors. Then, the Ayodi of Ur-Namur, the Middle Assyrian laws, and the Code of Hammurabi. And then we need to try and discern the core principles underlying the law. See how Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 9 applied this to Deuteronomy 25, verse 4. Now we go to the final challenge in chapters 27 to 34. After giving them the law, Moses issues them with a final challenge. The challenge to listen to and love their God in chapters 27 to 30. He first issues a warning and ultimatum. Listening and obeying God would yield divine blessings, whereas rebellion and disobedience would lead to famine, devastation, and ultimately exile. He then forces a decision and said, "Today I set before you life or death, blessings or curses, goodness or evil. So choose life by loving the Lord and listening to Him." In Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 15 to 20. Now Moses is predicting rebellion, disobedience, and exile versus repentance and salvation. Moses said, "I know after I die, you will rebel against God and end up in exile. However, one day when sitting in exile, Israel can turn back to God, who will circumcise their hearts." Here, Moses knew something was fundamentally wrong with Israel's heart. It is stubborn and it is hard. Similar to the heart of humanity going back to the Garden of Eden's rebellion. where humans seized the autonomy of God, wanted to define good and evil for themselves, and as a result, it ruined God's good world. But Moses said, one day, just one day, God is going to do something to transform the hearts of these people so that they can truly listen to and love God and be led back to true life. The promise picked up by the latter prophets in Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36. Now coming to the grand finale, Moses ends his speech with poems of warnings and blessings. These are Moses' last words and death. He walks up to the mountain and he dies. However, there remains unanswered questions by this Torah. Genesis 3. When will the descendant of a woman come to defeat evil? Genesis 12. How is God going to rescue the world from Abraham's family? From Exodus to Numbers, how can God be reconciled to his rebellious people? How will God transform the hearts of his people as per Deuteronomy 30? Now let's look at Deuteronomy central position. Deuteronomy summarizes and concludes books of the Torah, the Pentateuch. It introduces ancient Israel's history recorded in the books of Joshua through to 2 Kings. It is therefore the heart of the Old Testament and the connection point between the various parts of the Bible. It is central in the event of the shaping of the epic story of the Hebrew Bible from deliverance from slavery to the Promised Land, the Exodus conquest. On the chart, you will see the three wilderness books, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. These are supplemented by Moses in Deuteronomy prior to his death and prior to his succession by Joshua. Joshua stands apart as the beginning of the story of possession of the land, the conquest, under the leadership of 12 judges, followed by the united kingship of David and Solomon, the building of the temple. Joshua and Josiah were paired to the former canonical process. 2 Chronicles chapter 34, verses 1 to 25. The book of Deuteronomy is central to the canon as framed by the edges with the fathers in Genesis on the left and the latter prophets on the right, as per Jeremiah chapter 31 and Ezekiel chapter 36. Linking of the Old Testament books to Deuteronomy begins with Genesis chapter 3, which I already presented the question, when will the descendant of a woman come to defeat evil? In Genesis chapter 12, how is God going to rescue the world through Abraham's family? From Exodus to Numbers, how can God be reconciled to his rebellious people? That is found in Numbers chapter 21, verse 14 to 15, which are the books of wars of Yahweh, which links Moses' Exodus and Joshua's conquest. In Exodus chapters 33 to 34 and 1 Kings chapter 19, links the theophanic visitation from Moses then to Elijah in Mount Carmel and Horeb. Exodus chapter 33, verses 1 to 17, is about the promised presence. The structure of the journey from Egypt to Canaan is three-stage structure, from slavery to promise then the great theophany, the promised presence, and then freedom to fulfillment. Deuteronomy chapter 30 asks the question, how can God transform the hearts of his people? This parallel structure can be seen within the Deuteronomic history from Joshua through to 2 Kings. From desert to promised land, two central theophanies of Mount Carmel in 1 Kings chapter 18 and Mount Horeb in 1 Kings chapter 19. The rule of God through kings and prophets. And to Mount Zion as a city of God in the climatic reforms of Hezekiah and Josiah. 2 Kings chapter 22 to 23. This three-part structure was further developed into a catenary, the four-part structure as depicted in the table. Now, how does Deuteronomy link to the New Testament? As you look on the extreme right of the chart, you'll see 11 themes comparing Deuteronomy and the New Testament. The themes are Jesus' temptation at the wilderness, Paul's use of Deuteronomy, blessings and curses, the Great Commission, importance of faithfulness, obedience and love, prayer and relationship, remembering God's acts, then leadership and service, the heart of love, Moses as a type of Christ. As you look through the chart, you will see that Deuteronomy is in the center. Above it, there's Old Testament books. And to the right of it is the New Testament themes. This presentation clearly indicates the link between Deuteronomy as central to the canon with the Old Testament from Genesis to Numbers on the left and from Joshua to 2 Kings on the right. This I enveloped by the latter prophets of the Mosaic tradition in Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36. This is the presentation of the position in this regard. I thank you.